Many moons ago, I was falling off the anime wagon. Nothing new was grabbing my fancy, and I've seen all the old shows. Even as I was drifting away from the anime sphere and toward the acceptable member of society sphere, I couldn't help but hear about jobless reincarnation, which I'm gonna break my own rule and call Mushoku Tensei because jobless reincarnation sounds like razor blades in my mouth. Everyone loved it, from the worst place on the internet to my own best acquaintances. Even Aimless liked it, and he's even more jaded than me. Even with all his hearty recommendation, I still wasn't sure about it. In my experience, when anime people say something is bad, they're usually right, but when anime people say something is good, it's a pretty mixed bag. After giving it some thought, I decided that maybe overconsumption of a medium, or consumption just for the sake of it, is the most surefire way to ruin any and all interest in that medium. Maybe I just need to take a break, come back with fresh eyes, and I'll see what I initially found interesting. And so I decided to watch Mushoku Tensei from recommendations by my peers and literally nothing else. And man, there's a lot to like about this show. The most obvious strength is the animation. It's downright fucking beautiful basically all the time. Every place that the team could have cut corners, they almost never do. It's even more impressive when you consider the director's last leading role was that of Gamers! A show about gamers! Which might explain some of Rudeus' more pedophilic habits, but doesn't explain why he's decidedly anti-racist. Bit of a missed opportunity there. World building is generally not something I give a shit about unless it's obscenely bad. But it's done very well in Mushoku Tensei. It feels completely fleshed out. There's countries, continents, gods, races, history. It's everything that my D&D campaigns aren't. It's also delivered rather well. There's not a ton of examples of shit just getting explained to you when it's convenient to do so. This is some shit that even the best video games can't do right. I said best video games? Thank you. Here's my favorite part of Mushoku Tensei. Almost every single character is thoughtfully put together and compelling. Whether it's the pure archetypes like Paul and Roxy or the characters with proper development like Eris and Ruijerd, there's very few characters who only exist to further the plot and not enhance it. And for the few that there are, I don't mind. I personally, I don't really mind. I don't really care that much. That doesn't... Here's my least favorite part of Mushoku Tensei. Almost every character is thoughtfully put together and compelling. Let's talk about Rudeus. For the Spartan in the audience who is watching this video without having seen the show, first of all, your address is on screen. Second, Rudeus is the protagonist of Mushoku Tensei. In his past life, before he was seppuku'd into Fantasyland, Rudeus was a reclusive 30-year-old loser who made up for his lack of career prospects and friends with a porn addiction of untold magnitude. No, Spartan, this story is not about you. You are not Japanese. I once again point to your address. After being reincarnated as Rudeus Greyrat, low-ranking noble with a bitch dad, a bitchin' mom, and a magics, Rudeus is determined to make up for his wasted life and succeed in this brand new fantasy world. Much like the rest of the show, there's a lot they do right with Rudeus. First being, his old life still exists in the new world. In most quote-unquote isekai, the protagonist's previous life kind of becomes this non-factor that only comes into play in giant bursts when it's convenient. It gets pushed aside in favor of, "Oh, viewer, look upon her size of chest. Look, viewer, and be amazed as we justify slavery." It's one of the only strengths of the quote-unquote genre, and it's mostly used very well here. Rudeus' flaws and trauma travel with him into his new reality. Being scared of simple social shit for seemingly no reason, being generally dumb, and saying lots of corny anime bullshit that would probably get him laughed at if he looked his age. The only reason he isn't ostracized in his current world is because he looks like a child. Remember this scene? If he looked his age, this shit would have gotten him thrown in jail, rightfully so. It's a dramatic irony that would probably work if the show had any self-awareness about the character they've created. I'm not a brainlet who needs my protagonist to be a perfect bastion of justice and hot babes. A lot of my favorite series center on pathetic, barely functional, downright shitty people. Thing is, for these characters to work, it requires the writers to know that the character's flaws and their shortcomings are not the same thing. To clarify, Rudeus' flaws are the things we don't like about him, things he does that hinders others. He routinely creeps on girls of prepubescent age and valiantly declares his intention to groom this child within the first 3 episodes. He forgets a lot of the time that this world is as real as it gets, going around and playing the hero without thinking about anyone else except when it advantages him, which it often does because Rudeus suffers from being the center of the observable universe. He's as shallow as a nanoparticle, gladly maintaining that to the bitter end, and he plays dizzy in accent core. These are the things that make Rudeus a shitty person. These are the things that make Rudeus undeserving of a happy ending or redemption. These are very different things than Rudeus' shortcomings. Rudeus' shortcomings are the things that halt him on his course not to better himself or any of that homo shit, but bettering his life materially or otherwise. He can't leave the house because of trauma from his past life. His Sudoku family was teleported to the other side of the planet, and I think that's it, actually. These are the things that make Rudeus unhappy. We don't hate Rudeus for these things. If your friend had their family teleported to the opposite side of the planet, you'd want them to overcome that, I think. Ideally, a show with an unpleasant protagonist like this either takes the path of fixing their flaws, which leads to them overcoming their shortcomings, or fixing neither and showing how they work against the character and their goals. And Mushoku Tensei goobs that part up hard. Throughout the course of the first 2 seasons, Rudeus overcomes his social anxiety, acquires magical prowess unheard of for a child, and finds a place in the world. And it all feels deeply unearned because even though he's stronger, he's cool magic guy, he's still just as shit as he was at the beginning. He still creeps on prepubescent girls, he still lives life like it's a fucking video game, and he'd be popping this shit if he could. In the end, it's just all for nothing. Like every other garbage isekai power fantasy. Rudeus gets rewarded despite his shitty behavior with no real consequences. He goes about groping and peeping and grooming and stealing, with the only repercussion being that sometimes he gets hit on the head for it and we all laugh like they didn't do this exact same thing every 5 minutes through the last 12 episodes. It's been well documented that I haven't laughed since the rodeo incident in 2007, but the number of times that Rudeus's and other sexual assault is played for a laugh range from annoying to straight up gross. I guess it's characterization, but all the cheese past the first 20 times it happens is reminding me that Rudeus still hasn't improved past his old life and doesn't deserve a happy ending. There are moments where Rudeus appears to improve. The night where he nearly pressures Eris into sex she doesn't want stands out. He has this weird moment of self-reflection after she knocks his ass to the corner. For that moment, you think that Rudeus is done being a pedophile and has joined the rest of the world and being the absolute least that a person can be. It's a good scene, up until it isn't, and if Rudeus had gone on to show that this experience had revealed to him how weird and fucked up he is, it would have been a great scene up until it wasn't. But Rudeus stays exactly the same. The only difference being that instead of groping and stealing, he downgrades to peeping and jerking. An improvement, I guess, but only in the way that this video is an improvement to the Vernal Edge video. They're still shit. I understand that the show has other shit that it wants to do, but at the end of 23 episodes, 13 years in Mushoku Standard Time, Rudeus is still as pedophilic as he was when he was born. That sounds weird. If 13 years of hot moms and hot maids and hot illiterate feral samurai woman, on top of the general moral reprehensibility of what you've become, aren't enough to make you the bare minimum, I don't know what else can be done for you, Rudeus. I'd point out some of the stuff they could have cut to give Rudeus some time to improve his character, but they literally don't have to. There's plenty of places throughout the show that seems like areas where they intend Rudeus to undergo some sort of growth, but he just doesn't. There's a scene I mentioned earlier with Eris, but there's also this example, which is admittedly less gross, but truly hurts way more because of how Rudeus' failure to grow absolutely neuters what would have probably been the best part of the entire series. Episode 16, Family Squabbles, is such a genuinely great episode. Rudeus and Co arrive in the city of, Paul's city, the city Paul is in. After being on the road for literal years, Rudeus finally finds Paul, his father. Rudeus cheerfully tells him all the anime bullshit adventures he's been on since the teleportation, befriending a kind-hearted demon warrior alongside his love interest / cousin / student / 10-year-old cousin. For fuck's sake. This provokes Paul to just absolutely lay into Rudeus about how he's a dumb fuck who was too busy living in his bullshit fantasy world to let his family know that he wasn't dead. In the years he and his family have been missing, Rudeus hasn't even thought to contact Paul or Roxy or anyone. Once. He punches Rudeus, his 10-year-old son who he hasn't seen in X years, in the middle of a bar, and everyone, rightfully, is like, dude, he's like 5. And that's what I love about this episode. Paul, the womanizing rapist child beater, is right. He goes about it like the piece of shit he is, but he's right. Everyone in the tavern rules in Rudeus' favor. After all, he's just a kid. But he's not just a kid, and Paul knows that. He doesn't literally know it, all the Isaiki stuff, but he knows that Rudeus is not a child. Paul is the only person who can treat Rudeus like he deserves to be treated. When it's all said and done, Rudeus goes about justifying his actions to himself in his room, declaring his righteousness, right before getting hit with a stab of emotion so deep he pukes. Episode 16 is one of the realest depictions of familial conflict I've ever seen, minus the, literal physical violence part. And then we get episode 17, Reunion. In the first draft of this script, I kinda railed on this episode. Initially, it seems like it's trying to backtrack on what it said about Rudeus in the previous episode, but I think I was just blinded by hatred. It ends up just being a conclusion to the familial conflict theme, with the extremely genuine depiction of apologizing to a family member when you've both had enough time to convince yourselves that you're in the wrong. The flashback sequence is a bit jarring, but it's a nice way to put the viewer into Paul's shoes. Same as the whole thing with Eris, Rudeus doesn't end up changing from this experience in any meaningful way. A nobleman who kidnaps Rudeus' stepmom traps him in an unbreakable magic bubble and proclaims his intention to rape Roxy, which Rudeus reacts to with all the concern of me getting in my car after the friendly passerby asks me how much I've had to drink. These 2 episodes showcase the best of Mushoku Tensei, and that's what makes them hurt. You know why I haven't put 14 pages of word to paper about Lord Elmoloy II case files rails up in Grace Note? Because Lord Elmoloy II... Because Lord El Malloy the second case files rose up in Because Lord El Malloy the second case files rose up in Grace Note didn't have any moments like these, where the brilliance shines through the cracks with such glare you can't possibly ignore it. I didn't think it did when I started making this video, but Mushoku Tensei deserves all the praise it gets, and despite that, I still can't stand it. It's a shame that Rudeus' prevalence overshadows a lot of the genuinely good aspects and characters for me. Ruijerd, Eris, Paul, not you. Actually, this whole scene's pretty fucking stupid. And Roxy are all very enjoyable for a lot of different reasons, but I can't shake Rudeus' influence and aura. He's the motivating factor behind half of anything that happens in the show. I'm probably gonna watch season 2. I don't have much hope for it, especially after the finale, where Rudeus leaves the rest of the cast to go off on his own, and also where Rudeus bangs his love interest / cousin / tenure, like I said 3 or so pages ago. I don't know if I'll ever forgive this show, even if Rudeus is fixed by the end. I do know that even if he isn't, I might get to see Ghislaine again.
What is my problem?